Welcome to Business Mastery with Dawn Kennedy, your quick under 45-minute dose of expert insights and strategies to make a positive impact on your business and life. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Today, we are talking about family businesses, and I'm telling you, there are some people in the audience who have family businesses, but maybe don't realize that they're family businesses because there's certain, perceptions that people have about, mom and dad started a bakery. That doesn't necessarily equate to how family businesses can be started and run and operated. So I have Anne on here. I'm going to let her tell you how many years she's been in the family business and all the businesses. And she coaches on helping people find their place in the family business. So we're going to talk all about it. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm delighted to be here, Dawn. Thank you for inviting me in.
Can you tell everyone who you are and who you serve?
Sure. So I'm Anne Bauer. I am a family business consultant and coach, and I also own and operate my own family's sixth generation family business. I have been in that business. I started working for the company right out of college. So, gosh, we're approaching 25 years ago. And actually had no intention of taking over the family business. It was one of those things where I was getting ready to graduate, and my dad said, "We have this opening that we need filled, and we would really like a family member to be the one to do it." And that particular position involved moving to Europe and opening a European sales office. So he dangled a really fancy carrot in front of me and was like, "Would you mind doing this for a couple of years?" And I thought, well, sure, and I'll just
Right.
do it, for a year or 2, and then that'll be it. And, fast forward, several decades later, I never left and ended up taking over the family business about 12 years ago, when he retired. So that business is, it's an airline supply company. It obviously did not start as an airline supply company when it was founded in 1891, 6 generations ago. It was a supply outpost on the Oregon and Santa Fe trails that passed through Kansas City, and then over the years evolved into a general supply store. Then they started supplying local restaurants with tableware and restaurant supply products. And then back when my grandfather was running the company, TWA was headquartered in Kansas City, and he started supplying TWA. And so that's how we entered into the airline industry. And by the time my dad took it over, he was kind of looking at sort of the trends and the future of sort of small retail stores, and decided that it was really time to close down those little retail shops and go ahead and go all in on the airline business. And so that is what we do today. So, yeah. And then in addition to that, my family also has a fourth generation cattle ranch that my brother is in the process of taking over. Along with his wife. So he lives and operates on the ranch just about a quarter of a mile from my parents. So they're all there, which I think shout out to ag families who know how, intense that can be, living and working together really closely. And then my sister is one of those people that I think you spoke about at the beginning here, Dawn, who didn't really realize she had a family business, but she um, is a part owner along with my dad in a third generation citrus operation we have in Texas. And so we laugh that she has always been very encouraging of my work and is like, "That's great. That's so needed in the world." And then about a year ago, she was like, "Wait a second,
Right.
I have a family business." Yeah.
Right, right. So you have Legacy Magazine and a Legacy podcast talking about some of the ways you have to kind of thread the needle to figure out where you belong. And I remember reading the article on Please Just Don't Let Me F This Up, right? So that was
Yes.
like the first. So I do want to kind of talk about, stepping from that position in the business and evolving as the business evolves and how we have to evolve as humans, that is tremendous responsibility to have a store that was opened in the 1800s still going strong today, and I could definitely understand why you would be like, "Oh, thank you for the opportunity. Please don't let me do something bad."
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I always say that my unofficial mantra when I first started was, "Please don't let me mess this up. Please don't let me mess this up." Which, is a very real experience for rising gen and family business, especially as you're, stepping into a leadership position and going from just being a good employee, which was my primary goal when I first started with the family business, to all of a sudden realizing, okay, it's time for me to take the lead in my own right. And for a while, I mean, I'll be very honest, I felt like when I first took over as president, it was like I was putting on a little suit and just being exactly like my dad, like what would he do? How would he handle this? And while he had been vastly successful, and so that wasn't necessarily a terrible model, like the company continued to grow, and do well, like the numbers were all there as I was doing that. But I kind of reached this point where I realized that all of my creative energy was really drained. It wasn't feeling authentic for me, because I was kind of pretending to be someone else. Like I was trying to do everything exactly the way he did. And as we all know, you can't grow and evolve with any kind of entrepreneurial energy if you're just absolutely terrified of making even the tiniest misstep, right? And so I had to start really working on that and saying, okay, like what is it that I want to, do? What's my vision and my definition of success for this company? And how can I really grow as a person and a leader to be able to start navigating some of those risks and challenges, in my own right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how did you find your fit, I guess, from being a granddaughter and then a daughter and then an employee, right? So you kind of grew up in the business, but it sounds like you actually didn't really work there until after you had finished college. There were so many people who are going to be listening that are like, oh, yeah, no, I started at 14 and I was, filling orders in the summer or,
Yeah, yeah.
those
Well,
things.
I definitely had that too. I actually started in the summers and I was in charge of putting labels on our mass mailers. So I literally would sit in the conference room and just label catalogs over and over and over again.
No, that's
Yeah.
important work.
So so I had some of that. My brother actually had it worse though. He was in the warehouse and he was double checking product. And so he'd open something, look at it, and then close it up again over and over and over again. So yeah, we definitely had summers like that for sure. But I think for me, the thing that was really tricky was for the longest time, again, being the firstborn daughter and a real people pleaser, I was really adept at making myself fit wherever people needed me to fit, right? And so I think a lot of our like high performers in the audience can probably relate to that. Like, oh, there's a need and someone's asking me to do this. And so come hell or high water, I'm gonna make sure that I rise to the occasion, right? And so for the longest time, I just sort of filled in whatever was needed and whatever was asked of me. And it wasn't really until I took over and was the leader in my own right, and honestly, I had moments where I was like, I need a boss to tell me what to do here, right? Like, and I'm the boss. Oh, darn. Like, how am I gonna do this, and so for me, really finding my spot came once I was sort of at the top, if you're gonna think about it, like, by the time I'm sitting in the president's office and I'm looking around and I'm like, "Oh, now I need to figure out what's my vision for the company?" And that's when I really started to dig deep in my own personal development and honestly in the a lot of my training and my path that unfolded from that point involved energy work and actually, like, connecting with the energy of our business as well, and so I started using that process to sort of, inform myself so that I could kind of become my own boss in the most, like, authentic and aligned way, and so it wasn't even really a process of, like, looking for the spot that I needed to fit, but actually getting in touch with who I am and really creating the space around me in order to really move forward authentically, if that makes sense.
It does. And you work with a lot of people in family businesses. How common is that, that you just kind of figure out where to go? It's a non negotiable. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, make a decision. You're like, well, what would my dad say? Or what would my mom say? How frequent is that? It's probably pretty common.
Yeah, it's super common, and a lot of it, the the situations that we find ourselves in vary a lot too, right? Like, in my circumstance, my dad, it was a planned retirement, but then he retired, and we always laugh that he's a guy that doesn't have hobbies, he just has businesses, so, like, he retired from racket and then was kinda like, "Alright, I'm off to, like, start this new thing," and so he's available, but he definitely was not one of those outgoing gen that hung around and was, there all the time, and so I could call him if I had questions, but it really, in a lot of ways, was kind of abrupt. I was like, "Oh, well, I'm in charge now," and I think for some people, we always talk about with my clients, like, the best laid plans, right? Like, we may have a plan for a transition, but then, fate steps in and suddenly, the transition has to happen quicker due to illness or, heaven forbid, a death that was unplanned. And so I think it's actually quite common, to find ourselves all of a sudden having to rise to the occasion when that wasn't maybe the original plan.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about finding your place in the family business as far as what if you don't have a passion for the business? It sounds like your brother and sister actually have other things they're super passionate about. They happen to be businesses as well.
Mhm.
Why did you stay with this business? Why didn't all the family members join the board?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Because
For me, in a lot of ways, I had to find the aspect of the business that really connected with my passion, because, I mean, if I'm totally honest, I'm not really, really passionate about plastic ice scoops for airline supply, right? Like, I mean, I am passionate about flight attendants not putting their fingers in the ice, like, that I I do have opinions about, but in terms of, like, the actual widget, let's say, that's not really where the passion comes for me. For me, I've always had a passion for travel because growing up in the family business, our vacations would involve going and visiting manufacturing facilities or going and visiting, dad would have a meeting with an airline and we'd all go and then spend the weekend in Atlanta, and things like that. And so I was exposed to travel very early and it really opened up my sense of the world, and it still is what I would consider probably like a religious experience for me. Like every time I get on a plane and then step out somewhere totally new, there's something just really amazing about that. And so it's easy for me to take that thread and weave it into the service and the products that we provide.
that's amazing. So, but I guess here's the other thing is if there are people in family businesses right now who need permission to say, maybe this isn't for me, or maybe this isn't. So I know you also navigate some of that stuff as well. So your brother's cattle ranching, uh,
Mhm.
did he work at all in the company before doing that, or did he have a different calling?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good, yeah, perfect perfect example and a great question. So Dirk also worked alongside me in the family business. And in all honesty, I think for a long time, we kind of assumed that he would be the guy to take over because, he was the son. I don't know. We just, you kind of like work under assumptions until you start actually having conversations about transition. And so I'd always kind of assumed that he'd take over, and I thought, "Well, this is a good gig that I'll just, ride until, you know, until we wanna do something else." But Dirk really came to a point where he sort of looked around and he was like, "I don't love working in an office every day, and I'm actually really unhappy being in front of my computer all the time." And he found himself at this point where when he was at the office, he wished that he was at the ranch. But then when he was at the ranch, he felt like he should be in the office. And he kind of realized at that point that straddling both worlds was not something that was going to work for him. And so I think that he, had a moment where he had to kind of stop and think and, say, what do I really care about my life looking like? And for him, it was that he, wanted to wear boots and jeans every day and, have his hands in the dirt and, with the animals. And I will say that since he's made that decision, our ranch has never been better, stronger running. I mean, it's incredible what he's done by really channeling, his passion. And I don't think that that's something that could have been accomplished if he had continued to feel like he had to split his attention between the 2 companies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. What is that sense of obligation that you find some of your clients under that they maybe feel like they have to run it the same way, or they need to get permission to do things, or they're not allowed to pivot, or that they are not allowed to leave? I'm nowadays with the interwebs and stuff, it is a little bit easier to see what else is out there in the world, whereas 20, 30 years ago, maybe it wasn't. Maybe this is, what's expected of me. And I think that these younger generations are coming up and going, yeah, but there could be something more, something different. But I know you work with other family business people who are either raised in it or inherited it.
Mhm.
Do you find that they give themselves permission before you work with them to even say, I'm actually not obligated to do it this way, or we can pivot, or we can do these things, or I can pursue my passion through, the family business?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that sense of obligation is tricky, right? Because it comes from in my experience, both personally and with my clients, it comes from a place of like deep love and caring, right? Like we care about the legacy that is being passed on to us and we really feel the weight of that. And but it's kind of 2 sides of a coin, right? Like, there's both the privilege that comes with it, but then there can also be that weighty responsibility, and so I work a lot with my clients, as I have worked a lot with myself over the last many years, to start sort of delineating between, like, "Okay, is this part of the legacy and the tradition that I want to continue honoring and moving forward? Or is this actually a weighty responsibility that I feel like I have to keep doing, right?" And it's in all honesty, like, this is why I care so much about this work is because it's a often tedious or confusing process to start delineating that, right? Because I think one thing we see is the next gen coming in and being like, we're doing it all different and just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Which is not always a great strategy because there's really great foundations in place, you know? And so It's kind of like remodeling a home, like, not everything's a tear to the ground and build brand new, like, although we see that a lot in construction now, but, a lot of times it's really in the best interest to keep the good bones that are there and to start visioning of how you can actually change and move things in order to create, your dream home, for example. Yeah.
So where do you see some of the conflict come in? Is it at the time that we're passing things down? Is it just conversations, personalities, right? It's like if that's the same person that pulled their hair or grabbed their toy or whatever, and now you're supposed to be grown ups and you're supposed to be able to negotiate and things like that. But where do you see some of these conflicts coming in even before the transfer or the turnover? Where I guess my question is I know that the expectation of taking on the family business and in full disclosure, my father-in-law was raised in Kennedy manufacturing locally here. He stepped away, went in the military, then became a lawyer, and he was like, yeah. Right. So, but a lot of the other family did remain. And there was for a while there, from what I recall from stories, a little bit of a why would you do that? Right.
Mhm.
So, where are you seeing working with your clients besides this idea of do I stay or do I go, or is there's obligation that maybe things aren't working because of the old and the new, or because of the personalities, or because there was maybe an unmet expectation of something happening, for that person getting promotion or something? Where are you
Yeah.
seeing that a lot in? Because you have to have Thanksgiving together still, right? I mean, like, you still
Right.
still you still see each other at weddings. That I think
Yeah.
is a real trick to family businesses.
Yeah, 100%. I see it in where I would sort of, I kinda delineate it into, like, 3 categories in a lot of ways of where I see those challenges coming up. So, the first, I think, is in actual clear communication person to person, because it can be tricky, especially, like you said, you get strong personalities, like, the other day, I know that she would not mind me sharing this, but the other day my sister called me and she had had an argument around business with my dad, and she was like, "I don't understand how I can immediately feel like a 13-year-old who's in trouble again when we disagree," right? And so, and my dad would, like, also revert to, like, that kinda language, where he'd say, "Well, this is my decision," or whatever, and you fall into those little patterns, right? And so a lot of times it's about slowing down and really getting intentional with our communication and really getting some structures in place. Like, we have really set up some really clear boundaries around taking notes when we're talking about business and being clear about what's a meeting and what's just dinner with the family, right? And that way those things don't sort of start intermingling in a way that can get really confusing. Um, the other place that I see it really come up is in those boundaries around, like, what everyone's role is and things like that can get really, really tricky as well. And then the other place that I see a lot of challenge is just honestly in sort of the energetics of the business. So one of the things that as an example that I really found was when I inherited the business, I actually inherited sort of the energetic lineage of the business, and it involved some really heavy, difficult times. Like, my grandfather was not actually supposed to take over the family business. His brother was supposed to, and his brother passed away unexpectedly. He saved a woman from drowning when he was a senior in college, and so my grandfather had to take over the family business at the age of 21 and not only support him and his tiny, like, newly formed family, but also to support his mother and a couple of aunts as well, and the weight of that responsibility was heavy for him, and it seeped into the energy of the business as well, and so when my dad took over, I think to an extent he felt that heavy weight of responsibility, and then when I took over, I felt it so strongly. I actually worked with a coach and an energy worker for a long time because I was like, "This is more than imposter syndrome, like, this is heavy, like, what I'm feeling right now," and it took us a while to really sort of untangle that, but that comes in as well, and so I work a lot with my clients to sort of approach any of these challenges sort of from all 3 of those categories. So we look at the energetics behind what's kind of happening. We look at the relationships and the boundaries within the family and the business structure, and then we also talk about how to have clear communication in our relationships as we're sort of especially when we're transitioning from one generation to another and everybody's roles are changing, it requires a lot of conversation and a lot of transparency. And so I always say I feel like I'm wearing several hats when I'm coaching and working with family businesses because it's, part therapy, part coaching, part strategy. There's a lot that comes in, but it's really important to hold all of those things together because if you let one of those things drop, it'll end up coming up again in some unexpected way, moving forward.
Right, yeah, it's so important. I think that and again, as we were saying with the younger generation, they have the internet, they can see that there's other things out there, but especially in those earlier generations, I think there was almost like in royalty, this line of succession and the expectation of what everybody was supposed to do, and you just did it. Um,
Mhm.
and that causes a little bit of distress, I guess, if you will, in the family if that's not followed for some people.
Yeah.
So, here's the next thing. So, there have been some really cool family businesses that were started online, and in the age of YouTube and some of these things where kids are growing up in newly found businesses.
Mhm.
So the businesses are 3 or 4 years old, you've had a couple of kids along the way. The one that strikes me right now is Ballerina Farm, if you remember, that story. They started a farm, and they had their kids as they were growing up, and they were growing into the family business, um as a not a multi-generational, like, first generation started the
Sure.
business, and then they had the kids, I guess is how I'm trying to delineate it. What are your words, recommendations, advice? Because, as you know, our story, right, we started a business a few years ago, but all our kids are grown, but they still found places that they had some training and passion and things that they do what they're feeling really good about. But you were molded to a certain extent. I'm sure your brother and sister were molded to a certain extent. Um, if you're starting a new business and you have babies and you're first generation and you're building this multi-generational legacy along, how can you support that for a successful transition and things as they're growing up?
Yeah. You know, I feel like this is kind of a controversial answer, but, to be honest, I think you need to hold it really lightly. I think that it's important to really trust the path of the business and the path of your children, and should they intersect, great, and if they're not supposed to intersect, you need to trust that and not try to force it, I think you know, in all honesty, like, the most important thing to remember, and I wanna just recognize that for, when you're talking 6, 7 generations, that's a hard thing, It's a
Yeah.
hard thing to say, but you're talking about people's lives, right? And so, I think it's really important to give not only your family members the space to live the life that they want to live and are meant to live, but I think it's also important for the business too, you know? I mean, I think about, there are definitely businesses that I think have stayed in families for the sake of staying in families that
Mm.
might have grown and evolved had they been released, into the hands of some other steward at some point, things like that. I actually I'm remembering I heard, Kevin Hancock is, the owner of Hancock Lumber out of Maine, and he's also 6th generation and is just the most delightful man, and we've, spoken on several occasions, but the first time that I heard Kevin speak, he was telling the story of his father getting ill unexpectedly, and he passed quite quickly after that, and so it was one of those examples of where the transition is happening much sooner than anybody expected, and when Kevin tells that story, he says he still gets emotional to this day because his father said the most loving thing to him, which was, "You can sell the business if you need to." And the amount of permission that was behind those words, and spoiler alert, Kevin did not end up selling the business. And so, it's still very much alive and well, but and he has really grown it in a really incredible direction. So I recommend checking him out sometime. But
Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes.
yeah, for sure. But I think that's a really good example of sometimes you need to let what is supposed to happen, which is hard for those of us who are really good at controlling all the details, but sometimes, sometimes it's out of our hands. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, I think this is such an important, conversation because, like we said, we were talking before, we sometimes are in family businesses without realizing it, right?
Right.
It's like, I think you were saying somebody had a cousin get started, and it's like it does kinda change the dynamic because money, responsibility, entities, those kinds of things are involved, and if you treat your business you always hear people say, "I treat my business like my baby." It's like, okay, right? But then by the time you get to your 4th generation or even 3rd generation, it's somebody else's baby, and now you're just nurturing and taking care of it, and if it's not for you, I mean, I think it's a very strong position to be able to say, um, this was built, you're not obligated, you can sell it, this type of thing. I don't know that I hear that very often in the circle of family business, as an entity. It's a force. I don't even have a good word for it. Most of the time the expectation is that you're gonna carry it on another however many years. And we know from the data that 3rd generation businesses fail at a high rate, 2nd generation, 3rd. So to go 6 generations, there must have been something that was, became a desire rather than an obligation. It had to. Otherwise, there's no way. Because if you're not in it, what are you doing? Right.
Right.
No.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and that's an aspect of my own family business's sort of lineage that has been really helpful to draw on, right? Because again, like we get the whole energy of the business when we inherit it, and so there's some things that you are like, "Oh, this is not a helpful pattern." But one of the very helpful patterns that I really noticed in the lineage of our business is this ability to continue to grow and adapt to the changing market, right? Because spoiler alert, we're not still operating out of a covered wagon in downtown Kansas City, right? And sitting around waiting for the next horse and buggy to come by. Like our business has grown and evolved and changed from generation to generation. And so while some of the traditions are still there, we're still helping travelers along their way. The technology and the way that's done has changed a lot over the years, and so I think that that's an important piece too to remember as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The honoring the legacy and where you came from, but again, being willing to evolve and take
Mhm.
on market forces. I mean,
Yeah.
like you said, a lot of us like to be in the eaches. We want to control all the details and things, and that I think could be a huge challenge in the family business because again, oh, we're gonna see cousin so and so at the wedding, or we're gonna see so right. So, very very interesting. I do know, and there are a ton of sad stories of you know people who inherit family businesses or they take over and it becomes toxic in some way. People want to cling to the past or people want to move forward and it's a cautionary tale that the business as its own separate entity needs to be treated maybe differently instead of, bound to somebody's self-esteem, self-image. And that was my next kind of follow-up to this is if you've lived this and this is sorta kind of part of your image and your personality and what you've done,
Mhm.
how do you separate and balance that, when everyone else in the family is maybe looking at you?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think one of the things that is really important to understand is for a lot of folks that separation is actually really painful. And I think it's important to understand that and acknowledge that and and give ourselves and each other a lot of grace in that process too, right? You know, kind of again going back to the energetics of it, if you think about the entity of the business and we've been weaving our time and our attention and our energy into the business over the years and then to suddenly step away from that can feel like you're losing a part of yourself, right? And so it's really important to acknowledge that. And um, I talk a lot with my clients about really taking the time to let yourself root in an identity your identity outside of the business as well, right? And so to, acknowledge that it's a painful transition, but it also brings really amazing opportunities too, right? Like, you always think about like, oh, the retired guy who just mows his lawn like 15 times a week or whatever. That was definitely my grandpa. But but he also was present for his grandkids and played with us in a way that he never had time to with his own children because he was always at the store, right? And so there are other other ways of being, and I think having a family structure that and the family members that are aware of that and what that process entails, and almost helping the outgoing family or the outgoing generation sort of find their place within the family in this new orientation is really helpful and really honestly really loving too, right? Like I think that there can be this moment of, oh well, if I'm not in charge and I'm not telling everyone what to do, how am I even part of this family anymore, you know? And to be able to really help, support that and say like, yeah, you still belong here, even though you're not the one calling the shots around the company, it doesn't mean that your opinions aren't important, that we don't want your voice here as well, and really making sure that everyone feels included in the web of the family, even if the orientation to the business is different. Does that make sense?
It does, and that just I didn't even think about this until you said that it's not just the incoming people who have to find themselves, it really is also the ones stepping away
Yeah.
who have, again, made that self-identity, all those years, and need to refine, so that is not something that I was thinking about. I was thinking about it from the incoming generation perspective. It didn't occur to me to ask you about the outgoing, but yeah, I mean, I definitely see why that is, um, so critically important to be present to kind of help both sides.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the incoming generation to be aware of what's happening with the outgoing generation too, right? Like, there's definitely times where I'm working with, you know, a new president in a family business, but we're talking a lot about the old president, even though they're not necessarily in the room with us having these conversations. Their energy is very present, right? And so I think it's important for the incoming generation to know that that's happening as well, because it can come out in funny ways, right? Like, it can feel like almost this tug of war a little bit around the leadership of the business, and so to know that that's part of the process, I think can really help ease that transition process for everyone.
Right. Wow. Amazing. So, where can everyone find you? And if you don't know while you're listening, if you are in a family business, person that you are working with today, will you see them at a reunion? Yes or no? Will you see them at a wedding? Yes or no? Are you, related in some ways, second cousins once removed? I don't know. But it's interesting that there are a lot of people who are in business, and because it isn't structured like mom and dad started the business, then my sister and I came in, and then my brother, right? They don't consider that there are these other nuances
Mhm.
that, yeah, could come out at a baby shower. I mean, it's interesting that the people who don't realize that this truly is, this beautiful, impactful way to be building legacy without realizing it doesn't have to look a particular way.
Right, right.
Amazing. So where can people find you and sign up for your magazine and listen to your podcast?
Yeah, so my website is thelegacyevolution.com, and there's a tab on the header there that has says resources, and you can sign up for we've got a quarterly magazine that comes out. The podcast is on there. You can sign up to follow my blog. I also have a weekly newsletter and a free monthly resource guide that comes out, and all of those links are available there. I'm also offering right now on the website, I created a 5 pitfalls of family business and how to avoid them. It's a free guide and a private podcast, and it's a lot of fun. Actually, I'm super proud of it, and so that's what I want to tell everybody about it, because there's something in there that will help everyone, even if, like you said, you're that first generation, starting out. It there's there's some good tips in there for anyone, wanting to really be mindful of how they are cultivating healthy relationships within their business, moving forward, so.
I love that. Yeah, we'll put all of that down inside the show notes. So if you find this on the day it launches or 2 years later, you can always find Anne. I've known her for quite a while. She's an incredible human. And yeah, the family business consulting that you've gone into and kind of niche down is I really think there was a huge gap in the market. There are
Mhm.
a ton of people that can consult in businesses, and it's very easy to come in. And if there's a dispute between two unrelated people, an office in Seattle and an office in New York, it's the dynamic's going to be so different. And I really think you are stepping in and filling a huge, huge gap that is going to preserve legacies and help families.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dawn.
So welcome. So good to see you. All right. We'll talk to y'all next time on the next episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to dawnkennedy.com, and you can now check us out on YouTube, as well as, of course, any of your favorite platforms that host podcasts. Take care.